Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you all, whether you're tuning in on YouTube or on Rumble. Today is the 3rd of February, 2025, and I would like to say hello to everyone tuning in to today's stream. Our friend Terry says USAID has been shut down, all Twitter accounts offline. Samantha Powers isn't going to nations start crap anymore. We have Truth Thicker just sub to our channel. Welcome to Syriana Analysis, my friend. One of our friends says someone should tell Trump and Musk. I don't think they're aware of this. I think they are very aware of this. That's why they are shutting it down. Hello to all the community on Rumble as well. And salam, hello to everyone. I'm very excited about today's stream because I've been personally talking about USAID and NED for quite a long time. The USAID and National Endowment for Democracy, I have been persistently saying that they are CIA cutouts, or they are the soft tool for the US planners. Now, when you see the United States from the perspective of an empire, then you know that all empires, they rely on at least two different tools, one of which is hard power and the second one is soft power. The hard power is the military. If the US wants to knock out a competitor, a rival in a regional power, rising economy, they can use military power to destroy the country. But there are also some of the countries that there is no fertile ground for invasion, or there is no fertile ground for the people to rise against their governments. Therefore, the United States chooses soft power in these countries. And one of the organizations which did the bidding of the US empire was the USAID. The same thing goes for NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, in addition to other non-governmental organizations, some of which are funded by George Soros. So what these organizations have done during and after the Cold War is quite extraordinary, because they have, some of them, infiltrated the societies in order to change the perspectives of the people and change the public opinion in order to change the foreign policy of the country. For example, in some of the former Soviet Union countries, they wanted them to join the Western camp or the transatlantic camp. Therefore, in these countries, if there is no fertile ground for the people to accept the idea of joining the transatlantic camp, they would send these NGOs to these countries, and these NGOs would invest in the economic sector, in the social sector, in the education sector, in human rights, in democratic governance, etc. And they employ and recruit as many people possible, especially from the younger generations, preparing them for, let's say, in 10 years or 20 years to become the opinion leaders, journalists, activists, human rights advocates, and also politicians. Some of the politicians nowadays in power in Eastern Bloc, or the formerly known Eastern Bloc, were groomed or, let's say, recruited by these organizations such as the USAID. So the United States heavily relied on this soft power tool in order to persuade the people to vote for the candidates, for example, that they saw them in a favorable lens. And this goes similar. This thing happened in Ukraine, also happened in Georgia, happened in Armenia, happened in Romania, happened in many places around the world, including in Syria. Now, I care about Armenia and Syria because I'm Syrian, I'm ethnic Armenian, and I would today say with high confidence, were it not for these NGOs, the soft power tools of the United States and the UK and other players in the empire, it was very difficult for the imperial powers to ignite revolutions, uprisings, also to legitimize the armed violence, for example, against their governments. The example is Syria and Libya, and in some cases also in Egypt. So these USAID and NED and Soros organizations were acting as a Trojan horse in some of the cases to infiltrate the societies and change the foreign policy of these countries, or change the destiny of the country, or shift the country from the Eastern Bloc to the Western Bloc. And now we see that in Armenia, under Pashinyan's rule, for example, the country is moving from the east to the west. And I'm not here to demonize now Pashinyan. I've been already criticizing him enough. But what I'm trying to say is that were it not for this type of support, it would be very difficult for the people to swallow the fact that they would shift very quickly and in a fast pace from the east to the west, or leave the opportunities, for example, of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or in the BRICS, for example, and say, no, we don't want these opportunities. Although we are closer to the east and we're located in the Caucasus or in Eastern Europe, we prefer to join the transatlantic alliance. But now under Trump, it seems that Trump is trying to minimize the role of these organizations. We will come to that later at the end of this conversation. This doesn't mean that the US won't act as an empire. This doesn't mean that the United States won't intervene in other countries' affairs. And this doesn't mean that the United States won't invade or destabilize other countries. But there will be different tools and different approaches probably to ignite such conflicts or such destabilization efforts in these countries, but not through the USAID or NED or other so-called non-governmental organizations. So in this case, we're going to discuss what is the USAID, what type of projects they have funded in the past or sponsored in the past or up until this moment, because now their website is also being taken down. And then we will see that how impactful they were on the regime change operations, on changing the people's minds, and also in some of the dangerous projects that the USAID and other organizations basically funded and funneled money, including in the coronavirus research. So those are very important cases that we have to shed light. And I think the American people should be worried about it. And I think other people around the world should be happy that the United States will cut the funding of the USAID, which is by billions of dollars, by the way, per year, which raises the question, what type of work are they doing? Are they interconnected with the CIA? Are they embedded with the intelligence community? Are they basically the Trojan horse of the military-industrial complex, the intelligence community, the deep state in the United States, and especially the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA? So I prepared short video, 4 minutes video. What is the USAID, basically, and what type of projects they have funded in the past? And I'm going to play to you this video. It's only 3 minutes video. Tonight, most likely, when I finish the editing, I will post this after the video editing on my personal X account, Kevork Almassian. But let's take a look. The U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, is a federal agency established in 1961 by President John F. Kennedy. Its official mission is to provide economic development and humanitarian assistance worldwide to support democratic governance, alleviate poverty, and promote global stability. USAID operates in over 100 countries and funds programs ranging from disaster relief to education, healthcare, and economic development. On the surface, it's a beacon of American generosity. However, beneath its humanitarian facade, USAID has often been linked to US geopolitical interests. Here is where things get controversial. USAID has at times been accused of working in tandem with the CIA to advance US foreign policy goals. While USAID is a civilian agency, its activities have occasionally overlapped with intelligence operations during and after the Cold War. During the Cold War, USAID programs were used to counter Soviet influence. In countries like Chile, Guatemala, and Iran, USAID-funded initiatives were deployed alongside CIA operations to undermine governments perceived as threat to US interests. These efforts often culminated in regime change with devastating consequences for local populations. Today, USAID is often seen as a tool of soft power, a way for the US to influence foreign governments without direct military intervention. By funding civil society organizations, media outlets, and opposition groups, USAID can subtly shape political landscapes. USAID's role isn't always purely humanitarian. In countries like Venezuela, Bolivia, Cuba, and Syria, its programs have supported opposition movements to undermine the existing governments. It's not just about aid, it's about creating dependencies and leveraging those relationships to push American agendas. Critics argue that USAID's involvement in foreign affairs often blurs the line between aid and intervention. While many of its programs genuinely help people, others serve as a Trojan horse for regime change, destabilizing nations under the guise of promoting democracy. USAID's dual role as a humanitarian agency and a tool of US foreign policy raises important questions. As President Trump stopped funding USAID, people are asking legitimate questions. Has USAID sponsored regime change operations and caused havoc around the world? Has USAID bribed journalists and activists in the targeted countries to spread narratives favorable to the United States? Has USAID funded the gain of function on coronaviruses? So many questions to be answered soon, but one thing is clear. The USAID isn't just an innocent organization whose goal is to champion democracy and human rights. It's way more than that. One of our friends says, is Samantha Powers out of a job or is she going dark? I think Samantha Power and other, I would say, from the liberal establishment in the US, they're going to have some hard time now under Trump and under Musk's purge against this liberal wing of the establishment. And they're going to basically change the nature of the establishment. This is a struggle of power inside the establishment itself. We shouldn't take it as in a very, let's say, enthusiastic way and say, finally, the US is going to act normal and they're not going to intervene in other countries' affairs, this and that. No, they will continue doing it, but in different ways. So people like Samantha Power may be out of job, but people like herself will be spawned in the establishment and they will rise in the hierarchy very soon. So in this case, Musk says that the Elon Musk, who is heading US President Trump's drive to shrink the federal government, he says that work is underway to shut down the USAID. And Trump has assigned Musk to lead a federal cost-cutting panel. Musk says it's beyond repair about the USAID. And Reuters reported that Trump administration removed 2 top security officials at USAID during the weekend after they tried to stop DOGE or DOGE representatives from gaining access to restricted parts of the building. Trump later on Sunday told reporters that USAID has been run by a bunch of radical lunatics, adding that we are getting them out and then we will make a decision. Now, in this case, it seems that 2 USAID officials, John Voorhees and his deputy, were put on leave late on Saturday night after refusing to allow DOGE members access to USAID systems. The DOGE members threatened to physically call the police after being refused entry. They were trying to access the security and personal files. Federal officials are concerned that Trump is trying to fold USAID into the US State Department in an effort to cut government corruption and bloat. USAID employs approximately 10,000 people, 10,000 people, excluding contractors, with 2/3 of them overseas. 60 USAID members were already put on leave last week after trying to circumvent President Trump's executive order on stopping foreign aid. Now, we have to mention here that the USAID is the world's largest single donor. Imagine in 2023, the US disbursed $72 billion of assistance worldwide on everything from, now this is according to Reuters, women's health in conflict zones, to access to clean water, HIV/AIDS treatments, energy security and anti-corruption work. It also provided 42% of all humanitarian aid tracks by the United Nations in 2024. So their budget is $72 billion last year. This is not the budget. This is the money that they have distributed and sent abroad to do noble work, basically, right? Those things, if you see it from the perspective of a humanitarian work, yes, they are helping people. But that's not the full story, because in some other cases, they are also acting as a Trojan horse and trying to empower women, for example, by changing the nature of the society, or trying to spread the neoliberal values among the societies in order to bring these countries on the side of the United States. Now, the website of USAID is now offline, since Saturday, and the users cannot access it. Today I was trying to download some photos from the USAID website. I couldn't. And USAID has a staff of more than 10,000 people. So Trump ordered a global freeze on most US foreign aid as part of his America First policy, which is already sending shockwaves around the world. Field hospitals, entire refugee camps, landmine clearance in war zones, and drugs to treat millions suffering from diseases such as HIV are among the programs at risk of elimination. Now, if you take it from the Reuters, basically the USAID has been doing only good, noble work, humanitarian assistance, war zones, and also against the diseases. But as I mentioned, that's not the only, that's not the full story. They're hiding a lot. And today we're going to reveal and expose some of these shady operations, let's say, of the USAID in different countries abroad, not in the United States. And you will judge if this organization is doing only noble humanitarian work, or it's mixed, or only shady operations. But before I go into that, when you hear the term USAID, what comes to your mind first, right? It's the American aid, right? Even myself, I thought that's the case up until a few days ago. Only a few days ago, I noticed that the USAID is not a USAID. It stands for the U.S. Agency for International Development. It has nothing to do with aid. So it sounds like aid, but it's not aid. And in this case, Mike Pence, he was on Joe Rogan. This was, I think, a few weeks ago. And he mentioned few important information about this case. And it seems that Mike Pence, I'm just saying it seems so, that he is supported by Elon Musk, right? And this campaign against USAID started a few weeks ago before it reached to its peak. And Mike Pence says, there is no aid in USAID. It's not an aid organization. USAID stands for U.S. Agency for International Development. What it's developing is all the activist organizations in foreign countries that the State Department is building to gain influence. USAID was created to be a central hub that organized all the different foreign clandestine operations. It has $50 billion budget. The entire intelligence community is only $72 billion. It's more than the CIA and the State Department together. It's a switch player to assist the Pentagon, the State Department, and the intelligence community. Our friend says, when did you learn that, Kevork? I learned that the USAID doesn't stand for USAID only a few days ago. Excuse my ignorance, because I thought it's a USAID like two words. So I will tell you two stories about USAID. In 2010, I registered or enrolled to master's degree in Middle Eastern politics in Lebanon. And my university was in the north of Lebanon, in a town called Kura, and this was close to Tripoli. And I met a friend in the university, in the same faculty. He was a colleague in the same faculty. And one day we were in a shisha bar, basically, and he told me that he is now working in an organization called USAID. And I asked him, he said, yeah, it belongs to the US Embassy. And I was surprised, because he doesn't look like a pro-American guy. But I asked him what are the details of his job description, basically. He says, since he's from Tripoli, his job is to go and sit in taxis, basically, in Tripoli, and ask the drivers few political questions, basically, about some politicians and some events happening in Lebanon, and record them on audio, transcribe them, and write a report about the general mood of the people in Tripoli vis-a-vis their politicians and some of the political events. So in this case, the USAID was doing an intelligence job. This is the job of the CIA or other intelligence apparatuses. But the USAID recruited someone, paid him $1,500 per month to produce 3 short reports about the general mood of the people in Tripoli regarding the recent political developments and the politicians. So I just want to tell you something. if you know Lebanon or you know Syria, whenever you sit in a taxi, people speak politics. Into extent that people sometimes are worried to speak with the driver about politics because they would assume he is an intelligence asset. They would think that he's working for a mukhabarat. Mukhabarat means a secret service. So they don't really interact with the driver and answer his political questions or engage in political talk because they would assume he is an intelligence operative. This is how some of the intelligence secret services used to work in the Arab world in order for them to know what the people think about the regime or a government or a politician or a leader. The USA did the same thing, but vice versa. So this guy goes to Tripoli, basically, and he just sits in taxis or what is called service in Lebanon. And this service is cheap. I think it was 2,000 or 1,500 Lebanese lira back then, which was like $1. So you sit, if you do 10 tours, you pay $10, right? And you're just asking or initiating political talk with the driver in order for you to know the general mood in the country vis-a-vis the political events and developments happening in the country, and then report it to the USAID. And under no circumstances, in my opinion, this adds any value to the livelihood of the people in Lebanon or in Tripoli, right? This is an intelligence work. I think this is what the CIA usually does. So they were doing similar job. And they were paying $1,500. $1,500 in Tripoli is a lot of money. And back then, my pocket money, I believe, in the Kura was around $500 per month, right? So food and food, drinking, the university expenses, printing out stuff, etc. Taxi, transportation, internet, this and that was around $500. So he made $1,500 and he lives in his parents' home. It was very good money. So he worked for them. This is one example that I remember from the USAID. The second example I remember when the war in Syria started in 2011, and my colleagues in the university, some of them, I'm not saying everyone, of course, they joined the USAID programs in Beirut. And some of them were paid by the USAID in Beirut. Some of them were paid by foreign embassies in third countries, right? And all of a sudden, you see that the lifestyle of these students changed, and they started, like, you can notice it from the dress, you can notice it from the smartphone, you can notice it from all of a sudden they have a professional camera, and they have been training and learning these skills thanks to USAID. And some of them worked for the USAID and they became professional activists and journalists, and their job was to spread narratives, right? Favorable to the US against Assad. Now, one example I remember, and this is not funded by USAID, but rather by a foreign embassy in a third country, they have cooperated with, in my knowledge, with 4 Syrian Christian activists from Aleppo. And these 4 have been known for having, let's say, intellectual work. And they read a lot of books, they have reputation, they have been like known in the society as respected people. But then they were hired by a foreign embassy and they were paid $2,000 per month in order for them to speak with their surroundings and encourage them to join the anti-Assad camp. Now, all 4 that I know were Christians. And they were struggling, this foreign intelligence was struggling to encourage the Christians to join the revolution against Assad. So they recruited these activists in order for them to whisper in the ears of the people and encourage them to join the anti-Assad camp. So they focused on, because for them, they thought like, oh, the Muslims or the Sunnis, they would be easier for them to join, but the Christians would be problematic to join the revolution. So we encourage them to these activists who were respected, right, by the society. And I know them by names. And I know which embassy paid them in 2012. Because 2012, the focus was on Aleppo. They were trying to bring Aleppo into the mayhem. And the people in Aleppo didn't want to join the revolution. And everything was stable and peaceful in the country until mid-2012, which means 1.5 years after the start of the revolution, so-called revolution, when the people started going to the streets, or the city was invaded by these so-called rebels and half the city was occupied by them. But during this time, these activists did exactly what the embassy has tasked them to do, including mobilization of the people. And this is a similar tactic that the USAID used with my former friends and colleagues in the university who have become professional activists and journalists, and their main job is to build narratives. So the war of narratives is very important. And were it not important, they wouldn't suppress independent journalists and activists trying to spread awareness, open eyes of the people. And one of them is this channel, right? This channel is 100% suppressed. We have around 93,000 subscribers now. And the number of viewership is like 10,000, 12,000, 14,000 views per video. And I find that ridiculous compared to the subscription number, because most of the 40% or 50% of the viewers are from non-subscribers anyways. So if you want to, let's say, boost these channels' viewership, I would really appreciate it if you just hit the thumbs up. Whether you're watching this on YouTube or on Rumble, it helps. If you leave a comment, that even helps more with me. And I want to make one announcement. Today I had a Zoom conference with a platform. They contacted me and they want me to post the same live streaming that I'm posting on YouTube and Rumble. They want me to post my content also on their platform. I'm going to reveal more to you, and they promised me fair treatment, and I'm not going to lose anything because basically I'm already broadcasting this, streaming this on YouTube and on Rumble, and similarly it's going to be on a third platform. And the people who communicated with me today, they promised me that I will be treated fairly. There is not going to be suppression. There is free speech, and I'm going to be able to stream on that platform. So let's see how will that go. In the next few days, we will start streaming there. And when it happens, I will do the announcement. I will tell you what's the platform. I will put the link in the description below. I will tell you only if you want, you can join also that platform if you like to, of course. So from now, it's important, like imagine that the USAID's budget is larger than the CIA's, in the last count, right? Because I mean, even if the CIA budget is classified, we know that the USAID's budget has been more than the CIA's. So it doesn't make sense to me that an organization that is non-governmental, between brackets, and it is doing a job that should be less important than the CIA, and they have more budget than the CIA, which indicates that their job has been more complicated and more long-term than the CIA. And they were working, in my opinion, also in parallel with the CIA in destabilizing some of the countries. Now, RFK, I know many of you has lots of criticism for RFK for being an arch-Zionist and supporting Israel unconditionally and in a very disgusting way. I know all these things, right? I'm not saying that I'm giving him any excuses, but some people are wrong on Palestine, but in other cases they are correct. And in this case, RFK is, in my opinion, is very, very correct when it comes to the role of the USAID. And he says on, again, Tucker Carlson's show, he says USAID is a CIA fund that used $5 billion in 2014 to ignite a color revolution in Ukraine. Victoria Nuland picked the new government a month before the old government was overthrown. Take a look.
There are riots, and it's called the Maidan Rebellion in Ukraine, which we're not told that we are financing those riots. The newspapers never told us, our government never told us. USAID, which is a CIA front, put $5 billion into funding those riots. Those riots lead to a coup d'etat against the first democratically elected government of the Ukraine. It was a government that refused to choose sides and to say, we're going to be on the side of the West. So we wanted them out. A month before that government is overthrown, Victoria Nuland, who's the part of the centerpiece of the neocon ideology and who is now a high-level official in the State Department, has a secret call with the U.S. ambassador, which is tape recorded and is now public, which anybody can go and look up, where she is picking the new cabinet for Ukraine, which is which is a U.S. Western cabinet. So they're picking the new government a month before the old government is overthrown.
Is that how democracy? Is that democracy when Victoria Nuland picks your government?
Well, that's the point. Is USAID doesn't really do, and the CIA don't do democracy. The CIA has overthrown, I think, 83 governments between 1947 and 1997. That's a third of the governments on Earth, and most of them were democracies. Oh, it doesn't do democracy.
So the CIA participated in over 30 coups and regime change operations around the world. But the role of the USAID in this case, when he mentioned Victoria Nuland herself, she said, I think the number, don't quote me on the number, but I think she said $5 billion, right, in Ukraine. So they spent $5 billion around in Ukraine in order to ignite the color revolution in 2014. And what was the consequence of the color revolution in Ukraine, which was prepared, cooked, initiated, ignited by the likes of USAID, right? The civil war in Ukraine started after the coup, the illegal coup in Ukraine. And the war on the eastern, let's say, Russian-speaking, ethnic Russian, etc., people started because of the coup, because the people who were Russian-speaking or ethnic Russian, they rejected to be part of a Ukraine which is ruled by a government that despises them. And they saw the government in Kiev as radical, far-right, fascist government, which was adamant and determined to exterminate the Russian-speaking people there, and they have waged a war against them for how many years? 8 years, right? Until Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, and during this time, 14,000 Ukrainian nationals who are either ethnic Russian or speak Russian, they have been killed by the Russian forces. So, such color revolutions have consequences on the livelihood of the people. And since the Russian offensive on Ukraine, 600,000 Ukrainians perished, even more. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people died because of a problem that started in 2014 by the likes of Samantha Power, by the likes of Victoria Nuland, by the NGOs and organizations that have acted as Trojan horses in Ukraine, and they turned the people who are the Ukrainians, let's say, against Russia. Ukrainians and the Russians are brothers and sisters, and they have found a rift in the between these people. And this rift that they have created has led into a bigger war in 2022 and the killing of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians and Russians. So I would argue that Samantha Power, not Samantha Power, the other woman. I have an issue with remembering names, by the way, just for you to know. I can remember places, I can remember roads, I can remember lots of things. Like if you take me to some place just one time, I can drive back without, let's say, map or something. But I forget always names. I have like probably 15, 20 names maximum in my head. Those are that people that I know very well in my personal life. The rest are like, I just forget. Anyways, so in this case, Victoria Nuland, see, I remembered, and USAID, NED, they spent billions of dollars in Ukraine, and this has been the outcome. It's a complete disaster. And this color revolution could have led to nuclear confrontation between NATO and Russia, right? So it's a very, very dangerous business. It's a very dangerous business. Now, Trump says that he's going to stop the funding, but we have to remember, guys, Trump is not being very honest about this, because Trump himself, he benefited from this USAID type of color revolutions, and one of which is in Venezuela, right? Let's remember that the USAID played an instrumental role in the previous Trump administration. This was a few years ago, 5-6 years ago, when they tried to stage a coup against Venezuela, right, against Maduro. And this was endorsed by Bolton, Pompeo, and Pence. Trump was in power, but he benefited from this USAID funding for the so-called pro-democracy activists and politicians in Venezuela. And we have also to remember that Guaido himself, Juan Guaido, which then they labeled him as the president of Venezuela, he himself, he pocketed lots of money from the USAID. So, and now Guaido lives in Florida in the United States thanks to this money, right? So some Venezuelans may argue and say that he's a traitor and fugitive, and he wanted to destroy the sovereignty of Venezuela because Trump was eyeing on the oil of Venezuela in this case, right? So Trump is not being honest in this case. He was happy when the types of USAID basically acted as regime change operatives in Venezuela, and it failed miserably for them. And in this case, we have to be very careful what could come next. So abolishing USAID doesn't mean, or NED later, doesn't mean that this type of operations will be stopped, right? There is going to be other cases. But one of the famous cases where the USAID has intervened and NED basically is the issue of the Uyghurs in China. So we have, according to the USAID and these organizations and NED, we have 1 million Uyghurs incarcerated, right? And this is what the so-called Western media said about this. But who funded the World Uyghur Congress is the NED, right? And the same NED which lied about Libya, Syria, Iraq, and Hong Kong. So this is our friend and colleague Max Blumenthal. He's raising some serious questions here about this case. Take a look.
At the ceremony, I met Omer Kanat, chairman of the World Uyghur Congress, a group funded almost entirely by the NED.
The Chinese authorities, Chinese government put more than 1 million Uyghurs in so-called re-education camp. It is very similar to concentration camp.
How do you know it's 1 million, the number? That's a very staggering number.
Yeah, staggering number. This number was given to, by some or even some Western media estimates. We don't know exactly how.
Western media estimates.
3 and some of other states 2 to 3 million. Is there any way you know of? I mean, how do we check which is correct?
We refer to different references, and the data that we have, it's just based on what we have. Could you please repeat your question?
Really, I was trying to get the veracity of what numbers of people have actually been interned or been to these camps.
Okay, as you said, it's 5,567 in total. We don't have this entire millions of references. It's not that everyone can come to us and report the data.
So guys, the number of the people in the concentration camp in China are around 5,500 people. And this is what China says it's a de-radicalization or education camps for radical Uyghurs. And in this case, we have to remind ourselves that there's a history behind radicalizing the Muslim youth, right? It's an intentional project, a policy by the US, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, to radicalize the Muslim youth. And this has happened and worked perfectly in Afghanistan. It worked perfectly now in Syria. It worked perfectly in Libya, in toppling these governments, basically, by these radical Takfiri Islamists. So they're trying to copy this in China. And if you put the map in front of you of China and see where is Xinjiang, where most of the Uyghurs live, it's on the same path of the Silk and Road Initiative. So by destabilizing the Xinjiang, they can disrupt the Silk Road Initiative. This is the plan for China. So China knows this, so they capture the radicals, basically detain them, and they put them in the radicalization camps. But in the outside world, they say that China is committing a cultural genocide against the Uyghurs there. Now, it's important to note that Erdogan played also an instrumental role in encouraging Uyghur radicalism or separatism also in China. And they have been shedding crocodile tears over them. And Erdogan invited Uyghurs from China, from Xinjiang, to Liwa al-Iskandaron, or in the Hatay province in Turkey, and said that he will give them houses and settle them there so they would be in safety, right, from the Chinese Communist Party. And once they arrived there, he pushed them to Syria, to Idlib. So in Idlib, we have around 5,000 Uyghurs, very radicalized, very good fighters, basically. And they joined the Islamic Turkestan army. And they played a very important role in the invasion of HDS against the Syrian army positions. They are very competent and very radical fighters. So in this case, China is watching what's happening in Syria and the radicalization of the Uyghurs. They're in training camps. They are basically camps for kids to learn how to fight. And this example could be copied in Xinjiang. So that's why they're taking precautious steps in order to avoid such a scenario that is very plausible, right? Like, it happened against every rival of the United States. So it won't be surprising that the US would use such groups against China as well. Now, one of the world leaders who spoke true words about USAID was Nayib Bukele. Nayib Bukele says most governments don't want USAID funds flowing into their countries because they understand where much of that money actually ends up. While marketed as support for development, democracy, and human rights, the majority of these funds are funneled into opposition groups, NGOs, with political agendas and destabilizing movements. At best, maybe 10% of the money reaches real projects that help people in need. There are such cases, but the rest is used to fuel dissent, finance protests, and undermine administrations that refuse to align with the globalist agenda. Cutting this so-called aid isn't just beneficial for the United States, it's also a big win for the rest of the world. Now, I totally agree with him on the purpose of this funding, but what I disagree with him, that this is not only about fueling dissent in countries that refuse the globalist agenda. That's only one part of it, right? It's also meant to be used against countries that reject the imperialist agenda, which is Trump part of it, right? Trump tried to coup in Venezuela, and he didn't want to spread the globalist agenda there. He wanted to steal the oil. And Trump continued the funding of USAID in the last administration in Syria as well. So now with the cutting, I'm saying, yes, it's a good news, but let's see what is going to be the substitute, the alternative that he's going to propose, because I'm sure that the US won't back off and act like sane country all of a sudden. Let's see how is it going to end up. But Nayib Bukele is correct on this. Most governments don't want USAID money. It just creates more problems for them, and they finance this. They fuel dissent, they finance protests, they undermine governments, and that is very problematic in many, many countries, including in countries where such operations cause wars. For example, in Ukraine, right? What happened in Armenia in 2018, it's part of the same USAID, NED, Soros wave of color revolutions, which brought Pashinyan to power, and the Armenians lost Nagorno-Karabakh, which is the most important enclave for Armenia. And this was also, geopolitically speaking or geomilitarily speaking, it used to be a buffer zone between Armenia proper and Azerbaijan. Now that the Armenians lost Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia became exposed on the security level vis-a-vis Azerbaijan. So these color revolutions have consequences, and the consequences are on the shoulders of the people. The people, 120,000 people were forcefully displaced from Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia, so they were ethnically cleansed, right? And at the same time, Armenia's security now is exposed. So yes, these organizations act as a Trojan horses in these countries and corrupt the politicians, corrupt the journalists, corrupt the civil society, corrupt the so-called women rights advocates. They create the relationship of dependency, right? If you're young, you remember I mentioned to you this example of a friend I had in Lebanon who worked for USAID and they paid him $1,500. They create this relationship of dependencies with the USAID, and you're enjoying good money, basically, compared to average people in your surrounding, in your family, among your friends. So the loyalty becomes to these organizations because this is your source of income at the end of the day, and you're ideologically indoctrinated, either indoctrinated by them or out of opportunism, you're going to promote the so-called values that they're going to spread in these countries. The wokeism, for example, the LGBTQ, etc. And I'm not against. I always have to draw distinctions, right? I'm not against LGBT at all. I'm against these projects, the foreign-funded projects in countries in order to spread values in these countries that probably do not align with the general values of these societies, because these experiences of these people are different. They belong to a different civilization, to different religion, etc. So enforcing such changes on the people is wrong. And making the LGBT, for example, issue as the top tier issue in the 21st century is also illogical, because we have so much more important things to speak about, including poverty, including starvation, including wars, right? But we don't fix the things that directly killing hundreds of thousands of people. In fact, these organizations are creating crises which lead to the killing of hundreds of thousands of people, whereas they're coming and selling themselves to us as like, oh, we are just nice, and we are empathetic people. We speak about empathy. This is all about empathy and love. I don't buy that. I'm not naive to buy that. They're spending tens of billions of dollars per year just to spread empathy around the world. Now, one case that is very important in this, because we spoke about the meddling of this USAID NED as the CIA cut out in different countries, but also they have been likely funding dangerous research, right? And I remember this, and I'm sure that most of you will remember our friend Sam Hosseini, and he was the one who asked this question in 2024. He asked the State Department spokesman Matt Miller back then about the USAID funding of gain of function on coronaviruses. You remember him, Sam Hosseini. He was forcibly removed from the last press conference of Antony Blinken. It's the same guy, right? So let's take a look.
How much money went from USAID to the work at Wuhan and to their collaborator, Ralph Barrick, at the University of North Carolina, to collect and make coronaviruses that are weaponized, that are more deadly?
So I, first of all, reject the implicit accusation in that question, and I do not have at my finger. I do not have at my fingertips the particular details of USAID.
Are you saying for certain? Are you saying for certain that no USAID money went to the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
Go ahead.
No, please tell me. Are you stating that no USAID money went?
I will say I am happy to take questions from those in this audience. I'm happy to answer them. I appreciate that they treat every person in this room, including myself, respectfully. I called on you. I'm now calling on someone else. Go ahead.
Me respectfully, please tell me, what are you denying?
Go ahead.
What
please.
is your denial? It's a non-denial denial.
It's a non-denial denial. He doesn't answer the question. They have probably financed very dangerous, I would say, research. And this is Samantha Power. She was also grilled back then by Rand Paul. And he asked her, did USAID fund coronavirus research in Wuhan, China? Should we be funding the Academy of Military Medical Research in China? Some of the research proposals in 2018 were the Wuhan Institute of Virology asking for money to create a virus with a furin cleavage site, a SARS-like coronavirus with a furin cleavage site. That's exactly what COVID-19 turned out to be. So we want to know if there were other research proposals you either granted or denied that were in the same vein as creating viruses that could have become COVID-19. We can't tell because you won't give us information. I now have 25 senators that have sent you a letter and you aren't responding. You are being dishonest. And she doesn't even respond to this. So just trying to say, like, it's not just aid, support for the vulnerable people like the Reuters portrayed at the beginning. It goes beyond that. So we're talking about destabilization efforts, regime change, color revolutions, which lead to the death and the killing of hundreds of thousands of people. We're speaking about likely funding research centers to dangerous research about viruses in Wuhan. And we're also talking about drugs, because remember what the Reuters said, that they also combat drugs, right? But this could be exactly the opposite what they are proposing or what they are claiming. So in 29, John Kiriakou served as a senior investigator for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and one of his investigations focused on the USAID's funding of heroin production in Afghanistan. But powerful forces in Washington, D.C. were outraged by his inquiry.
I went to Afghanistan to do a study on the heroin poppy crop. And I'll tell you, nobody liked it. Afghanistan used to be a net food exporter. And as soon as the U.S. takes over, they're producing 93% of the world's heroin.
That's right.
I'd like to know how the fuck that happened. I get to Bagram Air Base and I said, I'm going to need a helicopter to Lashkar Gah. We get down there and it's a god-awful place. But man, I'm telling you, as far as your eye can see, all there is poppy. So I make an appointment to go to this DEA secret site. And they were like, you're in over your head. There are very powerful forces that want that poppy to be cultivated. And I said, why? It's 93% of the world's heroin. And they said, because almost all of that heroin goes to Iran and to Russia. And we want them to be addicted to heroin. It weakens their societies. I'm writing all this up. And Carrie's like, nah, we're not publishing that. And I was like, they got to him too.
Bro, this is huge. This is huge. So they're basically producing heroin in Afghanistan in order to export them to Iran, the US enemy, and to Russia, in order to make the people addicted to heroin. This is an evil, evil act. There is no other way to describe it. It's evil beyond belief. Look, there are reports that say when the Brits occupied Egypt and they considered themselves the mandate power over Egypt. And this is something that I heard from an Egyptian journalist. You can verify it. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but this is an Egyptian journalist telling me when I was in Egypt that after the 1920s, when the Brits occupied Egypt and they were worried about a popular revolution against them, they pushed the tobacco on the people. They promoted the tobacco in every way possible. They dumped lots of tobacco among the youngsters. They have promoted the shisha culture among the Egyptians to the extent that the people would become addicted to tobacco and be more busy in going out, hanging around with friends and smoking shisha or smoking a tobacco, and not to think about political issues or organizing or revolting, this and that. So this is one or two step even more than what the Brits did in the 1920s, 1930s in Egypt. The Americans did similar thing in worse thing, let's say in Afghanistan, by encouraging the opium and the heroin production there in order to export them illegally to Russia and to China, to Iran. It's an evil, evil act, right? Oh, so I would like to give some analysis here about what's happening in about. Let's see, what is this? Yes, this is it. So why the US is doing this, right? Just want you to for us to understand. So Brian McDonald says, feels like the end of an era. The US is dismantling its foreign interference tools, acknowledging that unipolar hegemony is over. This isn't decline, it's a strategic pivot to focus on core interests in a multipolar world. It's the post-American world order brought to you by America itself. Allies are now just nations to negotiate with, not vassals. The US empire isn't collapsing, it's downsizing, choosing a controlled retreat over chaos. But don't mistake this passivity. A US unburdened by imperial pretenses could become even more disruptive, free to act aggressively without pretending to uphold a rules-based order. The biggest global power shift since the USSR's fall is unfolding. I mean, this analysis also goes in line with another analysis by a brilliant analyst and a journalist. I think he's based in France, Arnaud Bertrand. Arnaud Bertrand also published something similar, and this is his personal analysis, and I agree a lot by him. It makes sense, let's say. It makes lots of sense what he says in this. He says, it's becoming clearer and clearer that we are looking at a seismic shift in the US's relationship with the world between, one, the US dismantling its foreign interference apparatuses like USAID, two, Marco Rubio stating that we are now in a multipolar world with multi-great powers in different parts of the planet, and that the post-war global order is not just obsolete, it is now a weapon being used against us. Three, the tariffs on supposed allies like Mexico, Canada, or the EU. This is the US effectively saying our attempt at running the world is over, to each his own. We are now just another great power, not the indispensable nation. It looks dumb, as the Wall Street Journal just wrote, if you are still mentally in the old paradigm, but it's always a mistake to think that what the US or any country does is dumb. Hegemony was going to end sooner or later, and now the US is basically choosing to end it on its own terms. It is the post-American world order brought to you by America itself. Even the tariffs on allies viewed under this angle make sense, as it redefines the concept of allies. They don't want, or maybe rather can't afford, vassals anymore, but rather relationships that evolve based on current interests. You can either view it as a decline, because it does unquestionably look like the end of the American empire, or as avoiding further decline, controlled withdrawal from imperial commitments in order to focus resources on core national interests, rather than being forced into an even messier retreat at a later stage. In any case, it is the end of an era, and while the Trump administration looks like chaos to many observers, they are probably much more attuned to the changing realities of the world and their own countries' predicament than their predecessors. Acknowledging the existence of a multipolar world and choosing to operate within it rather than trying to maintain an increasingly costly global hegemony couldn't be delayed much further. It looks messy, but it is probably better than maintaining the fiction of American primacy until it eventually collapses under its own weight. This is not to say that the US won't continue to wreak havoc on the world, and in fact, we might be seeing it become even more aggressive than before, because when it previously was badly and very hypocritically trying to maintain some semblance of self-proclaimed rules-based order, it now doesn't even have to pretend it is under any constraint, not even the constraint of playing nice with allies. It's the end of the US empire, but definitely not the end of the US as a major disruptive force in world affairs. all in all, this transformation may mark one of the most significant shifts in international relations since the fall of the Soviet Union, and thus most unprepared for it, as is already painfully obvious, are America's vassals caught completely flat-footed by the realization that the patron they have relied on for decades is now treating them as just another set of countries to negotiate with. I'm not one of the believers that the US empire is over, or the US empire as we know it is probably going to change its color. But I do believe that the US is going to play a different type of a game in the next stage. Not the previous old game, but it's going to change its tools. It's going to change its guns, basically, in terms of the soft power and the hard power. It's going to treat its allies as just other nations that they want to negotiate with, like especially when it comes to the tariffs. And Canada is going to be hit massively by this, and Mexico as well, and probably the EU at a later stage. So this is going to hurt and harm the economies of the former allies of the US. They're still going to have friendly relationships, but this might lead to other developments, and one of which is NATO. What is the destiny of NATO? If the US doesn't want to spend billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars on soft power, then what about NATO? Because the US is the leading power in NATO in terms of the financing, in terms of the operational and the hardware, etc., etc. Are we going to see the demise of NATO? Is the US going to withdraw? If the US withdraws, will the European countries stay? Those are all questions we can't really foresee and answer them in a few minutes, but we will definitely follow the developments and we will address them, and we will host experts. I will host experts to discuss these cases on Syriana Analysis for sure in the future. I want to thank Red Viking. He says, here is some USAID for the respected podcast host. Thank you so much, my dear friend Viking. I think you have also a great beard, as I can see in the picture. That's awesome. So guys, tomorrow I'm going to have Karim from Hong Kong with me, but I have to record it because 5 p.m. Central European time is midnight in Hong Kong, and he is a professor. He has to teach the second day. So I will record it at 2 p.m. Central European time, which means like 8 a.m. Eastern American time. And I will stream the conversation with Karim, Dr. Karim from Hong Kong tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. We're going to have an amazing conversation with him about many things, which I'm very excited about it. So if you're looking forward to it, I would be very happy if you subscribe to Syriana Analysis. And if you're liking this content, if you like this content, today's stream, I would be very happy if you hit the thumbs up and share this video with your friends. Just leave a comment under this video. That would help me. And if you want to do more and support this channel, you can become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. You have also Buy Me Coffee and all the other means in the description below. You don't have to do it. Only if you can, only if you want. Okay, my friends, thank you so much for being with me today. I'm very happy to see every one of you commenting on this, and we will see each other again tomorrow. So I wish you peace. Peace be upon you, upon your families. Salam.